Climate change has been recognised for decades, yet not nearly enough has been done to tackle the issue. In 2015, the United Nations began to take some large steps by outlining and enforcing the Paris Agreement. It was the first of its kind, a universal, legally binding climate agreement signed by the European Union and a further 194 states, promising a new kind of hope for a more sustainable future. However, in 2020, as we have once again experienced one of the warmest summers on record, we are entering a period of real urgency, and the terrifying effect of global inaction is echoing louder and louder. Sweden is often presented as a world leader of sustainability, with the Green Party as part of government and where the practice of recycling is almost a national sport. In January of 2018, the Climate Act was ratified, with the most basic long-term goal being to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2045 at the very latest. But to what extent is this being properly upheld right now? A proposed expansion of an oil refinery on the west coast of Sweden put this act and Sweden's leadership in sustainability to the test. The refinery is called Preemraff and was built in 1975 by the combined forces of the Swedish Oil Consumers Association and the American oil firm Texaco. This is located north of the small town of Lysekil, and building a refinery on this idyllic coastal spot was strongly opposed by nature conservation activists.
The typical part of their operations, the biggest part, is refining crude oil. So crude oil that comes in from oil fields from different parts of the world is refined and then sold and to a very large extent exported from Sweden to other countries.
Preem runs over 500 petrol stations. In addition to the refinery in Lysekil, it owns a refinery in Gothenburg.
They are refining about 120 terawatts of energy, and it doubled the size of all nuclear plants here in Sweden.
The raw oil distillation process carried out by refineries such as Preem produces heavy fuel oil, a residue high in sulfur. This fuel is very cheap and is commonly used for ships. The European Union has in recent years deemed it unsuitable for use due to its harmful effects on the ocean. In order for ships to use it without breaching EU guidelines, Preem needs to convert the heavy fuel oil into a supposedly environmentally friendly fuel. Therefore, in 2016, Preem applied to continue and expand their Lysekil refinery operation to the local Land and Environment Court. Although this proposed expansion would allow Preem to produce friendlier boat fuel, it would also allow them to double the current amount of CO2 they emit, from 1.7 to 3.4 million tons every single year.
It's not a way to take away the very bad crude oil that comes in, but rather continue to refine crude oil, and this in a time when we really need to go away from fossils.
Aside from the general increase in carbon emissions, questions have also been raised about the efficiency of this refinement process. This is highlighted by Hugo Norell, who is part of the opposition group Stop Preemraff, a network of organisations and individuals opposed to the expansion.
Det kommer att vara en av världens sämsta bensin och diesel som kommer tillverkas där. Att tillverka bensin och diesel av en sån extrem tjockolja som inte ens är flytande är så ineffektivt.
On the 9th of November 2018, Preem's plans were approved by the court. 3 weeks later, the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation and hundreds of individuals appealed this verdict, as they argued it contravened both the Paris Agreement and Sweden's own climate goals.
They release 1.7 million tons of CO2. They asked for 3.4 in the first beginning, to double. But then this discussion in public was so big, so they take a step back, and now it's 2.7 million tons. And if they have that permission, then they will be the biggest in Sweden ever.
In order to create political and public support for this increasingly controversial expansion, Preem used a variety of tactics to sway opinion in their favour. Greenwashing is a deceptive marketing tool used to hide the true environmental costs of products with misleading claims about a firm's commitment to protecting the environment. This method aims to influence and to exploit consumers' choices, and in many cases, corporations with heavy environmental impacts spend a lot more money campaigning to have a green front than on actually improving their green credentials. Gustav Matner, a digital expert from Greenpeace, has witnessed Preem's extensive use of so-called greenwashing.
An example of that could be, for example, to say that our refinery is more efficient than other refineries, and therefore you can buy our products because it's good for the environment. And when you do that, you are leaving out the alternatives, such as not burning fuels at all, but rather using other means of transportation or other means of electric engines or other ways. You are only comparing your refinery to other refineries, and that is not ethical, and that is a typical greenwashing methods.
Greenpeace has a website dedicated to exposing Preem's use of greenwashing.
In the specific campaign that they did leading up to filing for their expansion, they spent approximately 800,000 euros. But if you look at the whole marketing budget that Preem has, is obviously much bigger.
Greenpeace reported Preem's systematic greenwashing to the Advertisement Ombudsman and the Consumer Agency of Sweden. While the Ombudsman decided not to take on the case, the Consumer Agency heavily criticised 6 television adverts with the well-known personality Gunde Svan, who walks around in a forest with singing trees and talks about how wood is used to create sustainable fuels. However, the majority of their petrol and diesel is still produced from fossil fuels. Preem's response to the complaint was to say that the adverts were not meant to mislead the public, but rather expand people's knowledge about Preem and the company's climate targets. Preem is not the only firm guilty of these practices. British Petroleum rebranded themselves as Beyond Petroleum, while continuing to primarily invest in fossil fuels, and insisting that individuals check their own carbon footprint, despite themselves being the world's 5th largest emitter. Royal Dutch Shell has spent massive sums on greenwashing, promoting a video series called The Great Travel Hack, supposedly finding new forms of climate-friendly travel, with the majority being on cars. Shell is responsible for 1.7% of the world's emissions and consistently lobbies against climate action. Preem often puts forward the argument that it would be better to expand a refinery in Sweden rather than build a new one abroad. This claim formed a large part of their marketing strategy, but is widely questioned, as the regulations are the same throughout Europe.
There is no place in the world where it's good to have a refinery, because we need to stop with burning fuels.
Another popular argument in favour of the expansion is that it would generate jobs for locals. However, it is unclear as to how many more jobs would really be created, as tasks are becoming increasingly automated.
People should not be forced to choose between climate and a job. People should have the opportunity to have a job that is good for them and good for the planet.
The compatibility of an expanded refinery with the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit a global rise in temperature, has been widely questioned. The slogan Paris or Preem was therefore at the forefront of Greenpeace and many other environmental groups' protests.
Det går helt stick i stäv emot alla avtal och all lagstiftning. Och det som är så tråkigt med det här, för att just nu är vi 2020 och vi har så mycket kunskap och vi har haft länge om hur klimatet ändras, och det går så oerhört fort. Och när det väl den här bollen har börjat rulla, så det blir bara snabbare och snabbare, och tyvärr är det väl nästan så att det börjar bli lite sent.
On the 23rd of August 2019, the final decision on the refinery expansion was handed over to the Swedish government, a coalition of the Social Democrats and the Green Party.
Regeringen har mycket större, både befogenheter De har möjlighet att lägga in helt andra aspekter. En domstol kan inte ta hänsyn till något Parisavtal.
Jag tror att om inte regeringen hade flyttat upp den här frågan på sitt bord, då hade nog sannolikt den här utbyggnaden varit igång.
While the Social Democrats have often fallen in support of ventures which create jobs, the Green Party advised on September 5th, 2020 that the government should vote to reject the expansion, creating a potential intra-governmental conflict. This coincided with a flotilla in Lysekil, in which Greenpeace organised a COVID-secure protest against the expansion, whereby boats and kayaks gathered in the sea outside the refinery. On the 10th of September, Greenpeace activists blocked the port of the refinery for 62 hours, preventing tankers from delivering crude oil.
Nu är vi kanske tvungna att göra civil olydnad. De som är beredda att göra det. Därför att vi kan inte gå med på att de dömande, de politikerna tar sådana beslut som går rakt emot den rimliga moralen och de rimliga värderingarna, vad som är viktigt för kommande generationer.
A decision from the government was promised by the end of 2020, but during the production of this documentary, we woke up to rather unexpected news.
Preem drar tillbaka sin ansökan om miljötillstånd för Lysekil. Det kommer alltså nyheter nu precis om. Välkommen att titta på SVT Nyheter som sänder med anledning av det.
On September 28, 2020, Preem announced to the public that they were withdrawing their request to expand the refinery, attributing their decision to the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on the economy. With falling oil prices, Preem no longer had a financial incentive to continue with their project. But Preem also highlighted their ambition to speed up their own transition to renewable technology and end their dependency on fossil fuels. Greenpeace hailed this action as a victory for Sweden and the first step in Sweden's journey towards a fossil fuel-free economy. While Preem denies that this was in any part a political decision, the Green Party claims it was their green politics that helped this decision to stop the expansion. We spoke to Lawrence Torvart, climate political spokesperson for the Green Party.
Regeringen har ett antal olika typer av förslag och politik som gör att det blir mindre lönsamt att investera i fossil energi. Det första jag ska nämna, det är faktiskt något som vi redan har gjort för flera år sedan, och det var att vi drev igenom en förändring i EU som innebär att priset på att släppa ut i EU har blivit mycket dyrare.
The question remains, how much did climate activism sway Preem's decision to withdraw their application?
Miljörörelsen gjorde ett fantastiskt arbete med att sätta press på Preem, skapa opinion i frågan, visa varför det här helt enkelt är ohållbart. Och utan den pressen så hade det varit svårt att få det här slutresultatet helt enkelt.
Preem has set their own targets to be carbon neutral by 2045. For such a large company that has made the bulk of their revenue from pollutants, to commit to such a sustainable goal is as admirable as it is ironic. And is it really enough?
This is a very serious question. We are now increasing the temperature with 1 degree, and soon it will be maybe 2, 3, 4 degrees more all over the planet.
With a new American president around the corner and ever-increasing engagement in climate action, it seems that fossil fuels are no longer fashionable. But how did a project, which would have cost Sweden's climate goals and the Paris Agreement, get so far through the court process? It is clear that change is needed both in judicial and political realms, so that courts and governments can truly take the Paris Agreement into account. Furthermore, greenwashing that is perpetuated under the guise of marketing needs to be investigated, so that firms that legitimately engage in climate action are rewarded, while those who pretend are held accountable. While we are equipped with the technology and the knowledge to make cuts to emissions, most countries are not likely to even achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. In order to achieve these goals, fossil fuel usage needs to be reduced by at least a third. It's time for all of us to put real pressure on governments and the industry to make change happen.